know the vibes! Welcome back to another episode of the Hoop Genius podcast, brought to you by NBA 2K24. And yesterday, I told you that today we've got a special episode that features the director of Stephen Curry's new documentary called Underrated, Mr. Peter Nix. And he tells us the story of how the documentary came together, some insights into what it's like working with Stephen Curry, and a lot more. So make sure you guys check this out. And more importantly, on the 21st of July, you can watch the documentary Underrated, all about Stephen Curry, on Apple Plus. Apple TV, you guys know the vibes, where to go get it. Make sure you check that out. But have a listen to this and let me know once you've watched the documentary what you think about it and which players you want to see documentaries about, because you guys know I've been in my documentary bag a little bit. Made the documentary about Zion Williamson for Jordan Brand. Made a little documentary about Luka Doncic that banged off on the YouTube. So you guys get at me. We're back now. We're active. Hit me in the Discord. The link's in the description. Hit me on social media. Most importantly, kick back and enjoy this episode.
All right, Steph, ready?
Stephen Curry. Do not rely on him to run your team.
He was about 5'6".
Looks like a little kid.
150 pounds soaking wet.
That was when I first really understood I'm different. How did I get here? I was the undersized, scrawny kid that was just trying to figure out how to make it.
Steph Curry is hurt.
I was overwhelmed by everything. How would I respond? Let the work begin.
When you are an underdog, you have to take what is yours.
Get buckets!
Taking some college to the Sweet 16.
It's not about proving other people wrong. It's about proving himself right.
And that feeling of being underrated will always be part of the drive that keeps me going.
Stephen Curry, Underrated, only on Apple TV Plus.
Peter, how are you doing, my man?
Hey Mo, how are you doing?
Well, thank you. A little bit today. We have a thunderstorm, and my house got a little bit flooded through a window that had some sort of leak in it. But apart from that, I'm excited to be here talking to you. I was watching the documentary that you put together, and very, very excited to speak about this. I mean, just off that, I want to know, how did this documentary come about? Is it something that you went to the team with? Did they approach you? What was the story of the documentary?
Yeah, I have a company with Ryan Coogler, Proximity Media. Ryan and I met, more than a decade ago. He had, made this film called Fruitvale Station, which is set in Oakland, California. And I was doing a trilogy of films also set in Oakland, California. And so I was doing on the nonfiction side kind of what he was doing on the fiction side. We became, friends, and obviously his rocket took off with Black Panther and all that. And he became close to Stephen. They became friends. And, I don't know, somewhere around a couple of years ago, Steph started thinking that this was the time that he wanted to tell a part of his story. He had never graduated from Davidson College, and he had made this promise to his mom that he would. And he had tried one time before during the NBA lockout, I think in 2011, but he couldn't quite do it. And he decided he was going to try to do it again. And what better time to, roll the cameras. And so he approached, Ryan and us and asked us if we'd be, down to, direct the movie. And so we came on board, myself as the director and Ryan as the producer.
Amazing. What was your inspiration behind it? Because in recent years, we've seen obviously The Last Dance, and then Magic Johnson had his documentary on Apple TV. What did you take inspiration from when, putting together the storyboard and figuring out how you're going to actually direct this documentary?
Yeah, I mean, there were two pieces of it for me as a director of nonfiction. My style tends to be more in the present tense. I tend to document things that are unfolding in real time. There was an element of that to this, which was his attempt to sort of fulfill this promise he made to his mom. And also, we knew in the back of our minds that if we were going to make a documentary that particular year, that we were going to track the season itself with the Golden, even though it wasn't going to be a documentary about the Golden State Warriors, we knew that Steph is always reaching, trying to, win, and that chip on his shoulder that has been driving him since college of being underrated and being overlooked. And, it's really a huge part of what makes him tick. And so we knew that those dimensions could result in a surprising documentary, but the core of the story was this coming of age story, which the more we learned about his time at this tiny college in Davidson, North Carolina, that nobody had ever heard of, and the more we learned about the role that time in his life, the role that played in who he became as a person and as an athlete, the more we got interested in the side characters like Coach McKillop and his teammates on that team, made us realize that we had a documentary and a story that nobody had ever heard of before, and that it felt unique. And so that's really sort of what began the framework for what the film became.
Absolutely, man. It's amazing tapping into all these details. I know quite a bit about the NBA, I like to think, but some of these nuances of his journey, in particular, what you mentioned about him finally completing his degree and that journey that he's on. How do you, as a director, get kind of the talent, as it were, to open up about these things and be very vulnerable on camera with these open and honest experiences? Because someone like Stephen Curry is seen as like a superhero to his fans, to the rest of the world, but to show a side of him that's very open and honest, how do you get them to open up and really give you that raw emotion?
I mean, that's also what attracted me as a director to imagining what it would be like to work with somebody like Steph. I think we know him in a sense, in a public way, through his press conferences, through maybe his commercials, through sort of how he presents publicly, but also just the accessibility of him, that he's, I guess in the real world, he might be somewhat tall, but I'm the same height as Steph. He's not the hugest guy in the world. He's not certainly like LeBron or Kobe or Jordan or Kareem or any of these amazing athletes. He's kind of an everyman. He's accessible. And I knew, I sort of had a gut feeling that the humility that you see, was probably who he was, but I wanted to know more about that. And the first time I met him, he looked me directly in the eye, and there was a presence and a sort of, just an accessibility that I found really striking. And he immediately got his phone out and started showing me pictures of his time in college, when he was a teenager and a kid. And that was a moment when he crossed this threshold, from being a kid to being a superstar. And I think the nostalgia that he has for that was really strong. And I knew right then and there, that was the essence of, the story, his willingness to open up and enter that space. It felt fresh and new. I don't feel like we see too many stories of these moments when the athletes that we know so well became who they were. And so that's when I knew that he was gonna, be a subject, to some degree easy to work with, but on the other hand, he's also a very kind of very even keeled guy, so he doesn't, his emotions come out in very intermittent ways, because in order to excel at the level that he does, he has to kind of keep this even keel. So we knew that the film would have a sort of peaks and valleys in terms of how and when his emotion came out, and that's kind of what you see in the film.
Absolutely. As a director, you're around these guys that you're making projects about, for example, Stephen Curry. What are kind of the little habits and things that you noticed about Steph that kind of separate him from the everyday individual?
I think it's the sheer volume. I don't think people fully appreciated. We tried to capture it to some degree. It was interesting because he didn't want, nor did I think the Golden State Warriors want a distraction, because we were filming this during the season. So he's got a job to do. The Warriors have a job to do. And Steph's personality is that he doesn't want his story to overshadow the efforts of his team to do what they're trying to do every year, which is win another NBA championship. But we also wanted to kind of show people the sheer scope of his schedule and the number of things that he's got on his plate, his job, not just on the court, but as a spokesperson, his nonprofit, and then his family, being a dad, being a husband, being a son, being a cousin. And so that ecosystem of showing how much this guy is juggling, I think gives people an appreciation for, it's not just what he's doing on the basketball court, which is incredible. It's how he sort of ties together all these things, being a business person, running a nonprofit, being an athlete, being a brand ambassador, being a father. It's pretty amazing that he's able to operate on that level and achieve the things that he's doing. And so that's one of the things that we wanted to try to capture, and I think is rare to get a view inside sort of these iconic athletes that we know so well.
Now, Peter, I don't know if you know much about me. I actually produced a documentary myself about Zion Williamson when he was in his first season with the NBA. It was for the launch of his first season.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, I want to see that. I haven't seen it.
Awesome, man. We'll get you the link to watch it after this. But the hardest part for me in creating that project is we had hours and hours and hours of footage and content, and then to reduce that down to a consumable length for the audience, we had to cut so much out of it. What are some parts that didn't make the final cut of this documentary that you wish that, you could have shown with the world?
It's kind of like the magic and frustration of documentary, what you have to sort of leave on the cutting room floor. And, in terms of ratio, this one was a little bit more manageable than past films. I've had films where I've shot 300, 400, 500 hours of footage, and we got to boil that down to 90 minutes. This one, and the film itself dictates what's going to go. And we were very, we tried to be very clear with all of the stakeholders involved here, which is, Steph's company and, A24 who financed the film and was a sort of production partner, and ultimately Apple, to communicate that we really want the film to have an organic feel to it, that we're not just jamming a bunch of sort of people talking about Steph Curry, like, how great he is, and it being a commercial for Steph Curry. Like that, we really felt that there was a story here, and that serving that story really dictates what makes it into the film, who makes it into the film, what they're saying, and why. And for those reasons, a lot of stuff didn't make it in. We interviewed Allen Iverson, Muggsy Bogues, who's a close family friend to the Currys, Jeff Van Gundy. We interviewed numerous super fans at Davidson College, because at one point the film was going to be much more of that sort of origin story and people sort of reflecting on what it means to be overlooked and underrated, a la Allen Iverson. At one point we were even talking about Drake in there, because Drake, he is a friend of the families, and there's a whole Canada sort of piece because of the Raptors and Steph's dad Dell and where he played. But as the film, both the film began to unfold in the edit, and as the season began to unfold, we started realizing that the Warriors were making a run to another championship, and that's when things kind of shifted, and that's really what sort of dictated what was going to make it into the film and what wasn't.
And the timing of Steph breaking the 3-point record, was that something from the outset that you had in your mind? You had one eye on it, or was that more of a pleasant surprise when it happened?
Yeah, we definitely had an eye on the 3-point. We pretty much knew it was going to happen during the season, and so we were just kind of chasing it. The big uncertainty, the big unknown was, whether they would make a run at another championship. At the beginning of the process, it was just a vague thought, like, oh, maybe they will. But, they had just come off of a horrific season. Clay was just coming back. He'd been hurt. And even during the season, Steph got hurt again. So it was really radically unlikely that they were going to make a meaningful run in the playoffs. But that 3-point record, we knew was going to be some sort of touch point, or some sort of, we were going to use it somehow in the film. And it was tricky, to be honest, because that 3-point record, as does other things, undercuts this idea of, oh, is he really underrated? And constantly that tension of trying to sort of, to some degree, prove that sort of premise. And that was actually one of the interesting challenges of the film was what does it mean when you say he's underrated? What does that really mean? And I don't think, audiences, fully understood that. And so that was a big part of, the decisions that we made were to some degree trying to articulate and prove that premise.
No, I think absolutely the stories of him not being recruited by the colleges he initially had his eye on and that kind of thing really opens up his younger fan base in particular, because Steph Curry is one of the most popular players with the younger generation of NBA fans who weren't around for that college run. So to spotlight this is absolutely fantastic. But what was your personal favorite sequence of this documentary? Which part stands out to you and really means a lot?
I mean, there's a couple. I mean, it's kind of like asking me to tell me which of my kids do I love the most.
Everyone says they don't have a favorite, but everyone knows. Like I know my parents' favorite is my youngest brother. Everyone knows what the two are. So
the secret truth. The secret truth. There are two. I'm gonna have to talk about two scenes. One, just because it was so emotional for me the first time we saw it all coming together, which is, the moment where in that game against Kansas, where Steph wanted to take the final shot and he didn't have a good look and he passed it to Jay Rich, and Jay Rich launched that shot and we kind of slowed it way down, and it was very powerful to me. The first time I saw, our editor JD Marlowe did just an absolute stunning job on the film, and it was so beautiful, and it was so this universal, this notion that we all take that shot, and for most of us, like, the shot doesn't go in a lot of the time, or most of the time, even for professional athletes, but that Jay Rich took that shot, and the emotion that followed came not just from losing that game, but it came from this moment, this family, this community, this unit, realizing that it was the last time that they were going to play together. And that, I think that idea kind of transcended the notion of sports for me, as a storyteller and as an audience, member of the film too. So I absolutely love that sequence. I think it was difficult for Steph and Jay Rich and a lot of people to watch that, because it was the first time they'd watched it sort of really slowed down like that. And it was difficult. And then the other moment in the film that was really sent chills down my spine the first time I saw it was when JD started playing, our editor JD started playing around with juxtaposing and interweaving the then and the now, the footage of Steph at Davidson in 2008 in the tournament with the footage of him during the run that they made in the playoffs, and the motions and the shots and him falling down were almost identical, and how he kind of like cut back and forth to tie these two moments in his life together, one which they fell short, and one which they were driving to, sort of grabbing the golden ring, was quite chilling for me to sort of see for the first time. So I hope the audiences have the same feeling.
No, it's very moving. When you watch it, it's very moving. But what do you want people to know who haven't watched it yet and they're going to watch it for the first time? So going into it, what do you want the audience to know?
Well, you alluded to sort of his younger fan base, and so I think there's a powerful, it's a classic, inspirational film that sort of reminds us that, we've all had a moment in our lives when we've been overlooked, misunderstood, overrated, etc. Like, how do we get through that? How do we push through that? And the film kind of reminds us that for anybody who achieves greatness, there's someone other than their parents who made a difference in their life. And in this one, it's sort of, it's both Coach McKillop, and it's also the community of Davidson really believed in him. And that's a powerful idea that I think we all need right now, when we're sort of all struggling, both individually, we're struggling, as communities, to sort of realize our full potential. And I think it's just it's the type of film I think we need right now. And then the other is just, for fans of thrilling sports documentaries, this one's like way high on my list. I mean, I'm biased, but I don't take full responsibility for this film. I think it was a collective effort of Proximity, A24, Apple Unanimous, my producer and director of photography, Sean Havey, Allison Joy Gale, editor JD Marlowe. There's so many people that came together to really kind of capture lightning in a bottle. It's a thrilling sports doc, and I think for fans of that genre, they're not gonna be disappointed.
Man, it sounds like you've already got your Oscar speech ready with the love you're showing to your team there. So I'm hoping it picks up some awards.
Inshallah.
Hey, inshallah, my brother. So what the fans want to know is, as someone who spent so much time now around Steph and followed this journey, do you think that the Warriors still have it in them to make another run at an NBA championship, just from your personal opinion?
Completely, because it's like, and it's so funny, when we were going through the footage and starting to cut together these sequences, it was pretty strident. Like, you look at, like, after Clay got hurt, and I remember watching that game when he came down on his knee, then he tears his Achilles. The Raptors win, and I can't remember which sports journalist said it, but they were like, like the dynasty's over. I mean, people really had that sense. You referenced The Last Dance, that moment had already happened for this team. And, I think when you see sort of how the film unfolds, it's just a reminder of the magic that occurs. And, you see all these super teams that put together these packages of incredible players, and they fall short. They can't do it. There's something about Steph Curry that is just special. And there's something about this team that is just special, to where, he's getting a little bit older, but he's still in his prime. And I don't think you can count the team out. And once you have that sort of momentum of winning, and once you sort of have that DNA, it's an intangible that very few teams have. And so I think for that reason, there's someone to watch out for this coming season for sure. And I'm going to be excited to see how it unfolds. Draymond might be leaving. He's an unrestricted free agent, but like they're saying, like they're really going to work hard to keep him. And I think that it's true that he's an integral part of the team. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's really special what they have there, because they drafted all those guys. They've come up together through the years. No one predicted them to be a dynasty when they first got together. And especially a player like Draymond, his ability to, create space for Steph to do what he does is completely, I don't think you can replace that. But, you were around Steph. There were shots in there of him doing his workouts, working with the bands, the tennis ball, and all those other kind of things. Can you just give some insight? Because I had this conversation recently with someone. I said to them, Steph Curry looks like a normal human being. When I say a normal human being, I mean, when you think of an NBA player, you think of 7 foot tall, or like Victor Wembanyama, who you're seeing now, right? But Steph Curry,
that's different.
Yeah, we're going to need a documentary about him as well. So I have to hit you up afterwards. But, if you walk past Stephen Curry in the street and he was wearing a face mask or whatever, and you didn't know it was Steph, from his build, you would assume he's just an everyday person. But he's actually a superhuman athlete, not only in his endurance and the ability to constantly move on the basketball court, but strength-wise. Late in his career, he's added so much muscle and so much strength to his frame that's really helped him become more solid on the defensive end and continue playing at a high level. What did you see in terms of him taking care of his body and the work that goes in behind the scenes to maintain his playing at such a high level?
It's a few things. Like, I think the physical is definitely, he overcame some limitations. And you're absolutely right. He's about my height, 6'2", and I'm fairly skinny, so it's like, and I remember I played basketball in high school, not at his level, but like it was tough banging around in there with bigger kids, even at my age. And so I think the mental piece, and the cohesion of his support network and his family, is underappreciated and radically important to his success. And I think that is something that we wanted to try to remind people. Beyond that, he's got some, I think, natural gifts in terms of his ability to focus. And of course, the edge that he carries with him every day of having been overlooked most dramatically by his own parents' alma mater, Virginia Tech. He really wanted to go there. And for them not to offer him a scholarship is pretty shocking. in retrospect, but he carries that, and that edge allows him to get in the gym and stay longer. His conditioning, which is ridiculous, comes from, hours and hours and hours in the gym. And the mental piece is just crazy because he suffered, and you saw it in that sort of that's another one of my favorite parts in the movie is that sequence where he has to move through being injured and, getting the surgery. And, he was a very fragile player when he came into the league, and he was constantly getting injured. And so to be able to sort of mentally push through that is pretty rare, and I think that's what separates the truly great. I mean, I think he's beyond great, to be honest. I think he's in the top tier of basketball players of all time. I mean, of all time. So, that's part of what we wanted to sort of articulate the argument for that in the movie.
Absolutely.
That he hasn't really gotten credit for that.
I think you're absolutely right with the all-time, at his position, even in terms of all NBA players ever. I've got him in my top 10 personally. So when you talk about that chip on his shoulder really carrying him through, we saw, Michael Jordan inventing reasons to have to go at people and whatnot. So it's very interesting to see this perspective of something that happened so long ago now still drives Steph to this day. Yeah. Do you think that it's going to keep driving him as he continues through his career? Or do you think there's ever going to be a point where he goes, okay, I've got 4 championships. Say he gets a 5th championship. I've got 5 championships now. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I think you saw, and we tried to sort of pepper it in the film that the sort of doubt about him wasn't just in high school and college, that it has still kind of like followed him in the NBA until he got the MVP during that championship. That was his first finals MVP, and I think a lot of people still had sort of questions about where he sat in the sort of echelon. And so I think he, whether they're invented or real, and I'm sure, his perception of how people perceive him is probably different than how most of us perceive him. And I kind of relate to it because I'm a documentary filmmaker, and documentaries are always kind of get second, it's not like, Black Panther,
Yeah.
So we're always fighting for attention, we're fighting for resources, and we're fighting for marketing dollars, and but we believe that, people love documentaries. So I relate to it on that level, and that part of that drives me continuously. He has to have some kind of edge. I think to operate on the level that he's operating on, whether he needs to conjure it, whether he needs to sort of go back in time, to operate on that level, you have to have some kind of drive. And I think that's a big part. Beyond his natural gifts of focus and stamina and drive and desire, I think this sort of ongoing narrative of, trying to prove people who he is a huge part of Stephen Curry.
Man, he truly is a special athlete. What I want to know for my final question is, I think that as long as Stephen Curry is playing and on a basketball court, the Warriors are always in with a chance. It didn't go their way this season. They struggled on the road throughout the regular season, and in the playoffs, obviously, came up against LeBron James and a tough matchup. If they're going to make another run at the championship, will we see a part 2 to this documentary?
There's no question. His story has not been completed. And it was actually the part of the hesitation for me going into it, which is why are we telling this story now? And as I learned more about sort of the Davidson piece and, all that, I was drawn into it. But there is certainly another chapter to this one. And, to be realistic, like we're in a day and age and a media environment now where every, athlete and singer and celebrity and their grandmother is trying to do a documentary. And, but it's really about what makes movies special is something, A, that's surprising, and B, that is just sort of naturally organic, and that just sort of evolves. And he's a very mindful person. It was very similar to sort of, Kobe, at the end there, Kobe was transitioning, and it's what's so tragic about it, into another part of his life, as a storyteller, and he'd won an Academy Award and all that. And Steph cares deeply, not just about his game, but about other things in life. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see Steph, not just another documentary made, and whether we make it or someone else does, that will be determined. But he has other stories to tell that aren't just his. He cares deeply about the role of women in sports, and you just saw that this news of the woman who's taking over the team, the coach of this G League team, that we're at a precipice of significant change in our culture and in the NBA. That I would bet you're going to see Steph at the forefront of telling some of those stories.
Man, I'm looking forward to watching it. I'm looking forward to seeing what else you have in store. Peter, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for producing such an amazing piece of work, which I thoroughly enjoyed watching.
All right, Mo, thanks so much.